She don't play, and she my type. She got brains and them tatas. She that lady, she gon' dance, ain't gon' touch her phone. She gon' let it smoke, man. She don't play, and she my type. She got brains and them tatas. She that lady, she gon' dance, ain't gon' touch her phone. She gon' let it smoke, man. I like girls that dance, know how to move. Not just they friends, but with my dudes. Cause you look so fly, and you look so cute. Can I make you mine? What you wanna do? Yeah. She don't play and she my type. She got brains and I'm tight. She that lady. She gon' dance, ain't gon' touch her phone. She gon' live this moment. She don't play and she my type. She got brains and I'm tight. She that lady. She gon' dance, ain't gon' touch her phone. She gon' live this moment. I like girls that dance. And how to move, not just stay free. So fly, and you look so cute. Can I make you mine? What you wanna do, yeah. She gon' let this moment, she don't play. She gon' touch her phone line. She got them ta 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 ta. I like good that and then I got that one. Nah, with their friends. Sweet baby, without a boo. Sweet dot, sky, bop, dop, you see it, dop, beat, dop, them girls that dance, they just got to move, not just stay friends, but with my dude. Cause you look so fly, and you look so cute. Can I make you mine? What you wanna do? Yeah. How many times do I have to tell you? Masego done killed the game. Medicine, bro. Ain't nobody sick no more. You done gave him the medicine with that beat. And then the junk at the end with the trap scatting, ooh, that's gonna pop. When this pink polo drop though, when that EP hits the enters of net, people gonna be spazzing like Mr. Crocker off Fairly Odd Parents. Son, I'm telling you this. Pink polo. Your love be like yeah, your love be like no, your love be like oh, 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 oh. Your love be like yeah, your love be like no, your love be like oh, oh, oh. Your love be like yeah, your love be like no, your love be like oh, oh, oh. Your love be like yeah, your love be like no, your love be like oh, oh, oh. Your love be like
everything that I've done, face to face, you to know I never ever leave you alone. Never ever leave you alone. In spite of everything that I've done, everything that I've done, face to face, I just want you to know I never ever leave you alone. Never ever leave you alone. Time
tribe. I can feel your vibe from the other side. Don't you know it kills me to sit around so patiently? Don't you see it's not easy the way you keep teasing me? Don't you know it drives me
Okay, it's working now. Hello, everyone. I hope that you guys are not asleep after eating. So welcome to the Great Blue Wall workshop. First thing that I'm going to ask all of you, because it will be an interactive workshop, please come closer. Please, all of you come closer, because we're going to move and work in group sessions at some point. So I will maybe like call Thomas from IUCN to make an introduction about the workshop, to understand the objective of it. And then we will start with Clémence facilitating the workshop. Come closer.
All right. Okay, so it's going to be probably the most challenging time of the day because we're all digesting. So, and I'm not very good at sort of, you know. But first and foremost, thanks for joining us for this workshop. It's very cool. The Great Blue Wall, as you might have heard about or not, but you will hear about what the Great Blue Wall is really about just after from my colleague Peter here. But maybe what I can say is that most and foremost, it's an action-oriented initiative. The whole point is to really accelerate and scale up initiative on the ground, action and impact on the ground. Now, the good news is that it's an initiative that we've launched about like roughly a year and a half, 2 years ago, actually at the COP26. And it's getting quite a bit of momentum at the political level and also at the financial level, with large-scale sort of financial commitment coming our way. So now, one of the pillars of this initiative is about blue economy. In particular, what we want to support is the development of a regenerative blue economy. So not any type of blue economy, meaning we are not going to support extractive or oil and gas, etc., even though in some countries they consider that this is blue economy. This is not what the Great Blue Wall is about. The Great Blue Wall is about supporting or turning things around and making sure that those business models that are part of the blue economy become a factor of regeneration and of conservation outcome, as well as, of course, socio-economic outcomes, first and foremost for local communities and indigenous people. So that's sort of the basis. Now, we all know that as it is, blue economy is still much more of a concept than a reality, even though we know that there is many things that are already existing, happening on the ground, and we've seen that already this morning with really, really interesting ocean ventures ongoing. But we all also recognize the fact that we need much more of that. We need thousands, and in fact, I think you guys have come up with this 1,000 ocean startup. Yes, we do need at least 1,000 ocean startup. That means that we need to build a pipeline, and we need to find a way to finance those startups and those ocean ventures, right? Now, it just so happened that indeed, in parallel of that workshop today, there is a parallel session on pipeline building and innovation, which is run by our partner from the World Economic Forum, Ron, and co-facilitated by Ernst & Young. So today, here in that particular session, what we want to do is to really focus on how can we de-aggregate the hundreds of millions and billions of dollars that are coming our way into the right size and the right nature of funding that will enable those ocean ventures, those entrepreneurs, those coastal community to access that funding, because otherwise we might very well end up in a situation where we will get that funding eventually in a way or another, because indeed, you know, those donors, they do need to put their money somewhere at one point, or those investors. But it's going to stay stuck as it is in many other cases. I'm not going to cite any name here, but where basically they come, they say, okay, well, you know, we have like lots of money, 300 million, 500 million, 100 million, but we cannot do anything below 5 million euros. So where are the bankable projects? They come to us, they come to me, I say, like, well, but there is no bankable project that can actually absorb that level of funding. You can just forget about it. They say, no, we're going to do it. And then they come back and say, oh yeah, well, there is nothing. But there is those startups, there is those ocean ventures, there is those coastal enterprises that can be supported and scaled up, but we want to make sure that we actually come up with the right financial mechanism that will enable that to happen. So that's exactly what we want to focus on today. We'll eventually at one point break out into 3 key groups. One on which type of financial mechanism and sort of well, basically, how can we sort of enable coastal communities in accessing this type of funding, which type of funding, which size of funding, which type of financial mechanism can really sort of help them. No, the second group is going to be more like high-tech, high-growth type of ventures and startups. So obviously, they probably will need, different type of funding, different type of mechanism. And the third group is going to be more on infrastructure, right? So those will be sort of the three key pillars that we would want to pick your brains and ideas. We want really this to be as engaging and sort of as content-generating type of session. Why? Because as I said, there is funders that are coming. We need to actually start developing large-scale, large-scale between $500 million and $1 billion project proposal. But I want to make sure that, again, we actually respond to the need and to the reality and make sure that we actually come up with the right mechanism so that funding actually makes its way on the ground where it needs to arrive. So I'm going to stop here, but at least you understand a bit the content. So it's really action-oriented, and those recommendations that I hope we'll be able to produce will directly inform the project proposal and those sort of mechanisms that will be directly funded by this type of partnership. But before that, I'm just going to hand over the mic to my colleague Peter so that he can just sort of paint broadly what the Great Blue Hole is about and sort of where we are at, and then we'll start with the breakout session. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you very much, Thomas. Good afternoons. Yeah, I don't know whether I'm blocking anybody, or is it better to stand here or the other side? Yeah, so I think from what we've heard in the morning, the various challenges that are being addressed, we need to acknowledge that we just need to go back to the basics. Yeah, that for us really to be able to protect the oceans, but at the same time ensure that people continue to benefit from the oceans, it all needs to be built on the foundation that the ocean ecosystem needs to be functional. So the health of the ocean needs to be ensured. We had the startups, they were talking about, yeah, we're doing this innovative thing and all that, but they weren't going so much to the ecology of it. So within the Eastern and Southern African region, one of the things that has happened much better than other regions is the establishment of marine protected areas over the last so many years. And even the Western world right now, they're trying to establish some of their first MPAs now, whereas they've existed here, for example, in South Africa for the last, 30, 40 years. So there was a study that was done by IOMSA and the Nairobi Convention of UNEP. And one of the things they found is, despite the fact that there's all these MPAs being established across the eastern and southern coast of Africa, when it comes to whether they're effective or not, I think that's where the major question marks comes in. And in South Africa, there's a number of institutions like ORI or others, Bruce Mann and others, who've done a lot of research on whether these are effective or not. And last year, I called a senior representative from the government and asked, could you kindly tell me which two MPAs in South Africa are the most functional and the best run? And it's a response which couldn't come like very easily from their fingertips. So they had to juggle across the country, is it Simangaliso, is it this one? And it wasn't easy to answer. And if you go to Tanzania, if you go to Mozambique or Kenya, it's the same struggle. It's not very easy to pinpoint like, this is our best performing MPA. So one of the challenges that the Marine Protected Areas Outlook report highlighted is that despite having all these marine protected areas, the truth is, it's like they're almost just existing mostly on paper. So they are sort of paper parks. A lot of the agencies are struggling in terms of staffing, in terms of technical capacities, and other types of resources, financing, infrastructure, boats, or whatever, to do enforcement and compliance. And so the Great Blue Wall, as Thomas always puts it, it's not like similar to taking Armstrong to the moon. It's not that innovative. But it's about just taking a step back to rethink how can we do things a bit differently, just tweaking it a bit, but building on the foundations of what is already existing. So one of the things that exists is, across the whole coast, one of the most important activities that take place is fisheries by local communities. And these people have been doing these activities for the last, like, for generations. Yeah, they know how to protect these areas where they do artisanal fisheries, and they earn livelihoods from that. Yet, yesterday we visited a Balobi, and we met a former traditional fisher, fourth generation fisher called Han. So one of the things he said, I don't know, when he was speaking, the topic of marine protected areas came up, and he was like, no, we don't like this thing. Yeah, because it's like fishermen, when they hear marine protected areas, a lot of them in the region have been established as Category 1 protected areas, which are quite strict. They don't even allow for artisanal fishing. And so within the Great Blue Wall, the premise is that protection and conservation needs to be like really embedded in local communities, so they take up leadership. So there's a lot of promotion of co-management and locally led management, and shifting more from Category 1 IUCN protected areas to more Category 6, which allow for multiple use by local communities, but then not so much like industrial heavy use, but at least local communities can use such protected areas and such. And so the other thing that was highlighted in that MPA report was the cost of running marine protected areas. So the unit cost of running, for example, a kilometer squared of an area is quite high, and that's why a lot of the governments and agencies are struggling. So one of the ideas that has been promoted now by especially Conservation International is the idea of establishing seascapes, where you actually integrate in a number of MPA areas or locally managed areas into a much wider scope, and then you establish a multi-stakeholder platform that integrates communities in terms of its leadership and governance in guiding how do we all together manage this seascape for the benefit of all. Yeah, and so that's what the Great Blue Wall calls nature positive seascapes for people and nature, so everybody benefits. And then the second element is around restoration. I think we know that for the ocean to continue providing its ecosystem services and goods, the key ecosystems have to be functional. So in this region, we are talking about mangrove ecosystems that underline the livelihoods of millions of people in Mozambique, in Kenya, Tanzania, and the island states. We're talking about corals, coral reefs. We're talking about seagrass ecosystems. We're talking about the kelp forests in the Cape and other coastal types of forests. So different studies have shown the extent of degradation of these ecosystems. I think IUCN, WWF, and other partners, Wetland International, we've been running a project called Save Our Mangroves now for a number of years. And through this study, it's clearly demonstrated the level of degradation of mangrove ecosystems across all these countries. And you can't easily stop it without addressing the livelihood challenges that people in these countries face. And so the second pillar is focused around the idea that we have to continue supporting restoration at scale. It's not about a small community in Amatole going to plant mangroves from here to the door, and then a drone camera is brought in, shoots a video, and then we watch it here, but it has to be at a bigger scale so that we can really derive that tangible benefit within a much wider scope of society. And then the third pillar is what Thomas talked about. We keep hearing since morning that there is lack of bankable projects in the region. And so the Great Blue Wall, what it tries to do is try to bridge that particular gap of there's all these people out there in the world who can provide capital to these local initiatives, but then they cannot give 1 billion to his initiative running in a very small village because 1 billion is a lot. So there has to be this bridge in between where it's a multi-stakeholder platform working with additional multi-stakeholder platforms to figure out ways, how do we attract this big capital and be able to take it to the ground where action needs to take place. So that's, I think, one of the main pillars that Thomas highlighted that will be at the heart of what we're discussing today. So I won't delve much into detail, but I'd like to hand over to Clément to guide us through the rest of the process. Thank you.
Yeah, look, so thanks for the intro. I think it's really interesting. I think Erlan has got a list of people that had signed up for this, but I think there may be more than initially signed up, which is fine. I think the intention was to split up into sort of 3 groups. So that's why we have 3 kind of tables, and to have a little bit of a brainstorm. So hopefully your brains are working and you've had that cup of coffee and you're ready for the challenge. And one of the groups is going to be looking at sort of the opportunities in terms of bringing in coastal communities and the types of projects that would likely be possible, and obviously thinking about the sort of finance piece around that. One of the tables is going to be looking at the sort of tech space and you know, what opportunities might be there for sort of high growth type of models. And then I think I'll actually be helping with this one, but one will be looking at sort of infrastructure, so larger projects, obviously not oil and gas, but certainly thinking about energy, lots of other beneficial uses. So all of those different areas obviously have different types of stakeholder needs, expectations, very different pathways to growth and scaling. So that's what we want to kind of unpack today. And all of this will kind of, I don't know actually in terms of time, because there'll be a break at some point, but we'll probably do about, I'd say 45 minutes in the sort of subgroups, and then try and have a break, and then we'll bring it back together to have a bit of a plenary around the solutions, the ideas, and then Thomas and Peter will take that into their next session tomorrow. So yeah, that's the plan for the rest of the afternoon. I don't know, before we start, if there's any sort of questions for Thomas or for Peter in terms of the initiative, any kind of thoughts that we want to put out, and then suspect that we can go into the groups pretty quickly to get the conversation going.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you guys for all the brilliant background information that you've provided for us. My question is linked to the Great Blue Wall, as I understand it, is a transnational initiative. So how do you navigate sort of the geopolitics that comes with ocean governance in terms of country A commitment relative to country B level of commitment and all those issues that come with that? I don't know if that makes sense. Thanks.
Yeah, maybe I can take that one. Thanks, David. No, that's a very, very important point. But in fact, we are trying not to navigate it, but to bypass it in a way, because we've deliberately structured the initiative as more like a coalition of the willings rather than something that needs to be endorsed and signed off by all the countries. Why? To do exactly that, to avoid the geopolitics and saying, oh yeah, but you know, and then because otherwise you start entering into more like a UN type of negotiation, and we don't want that because that's not what IUCN or that's not what we believe is needed to really deliver action. Now, some of those bodies exist in the region. There is the Nairobi Convention, there is the Benguela Current Commission, there is other commissions here and there, and they do their job. But when it comes to delivering action on the ground, well, I think we can all agree that sort of politics, they're not necessarily sort of the best at actually sort of upscaling this. So now by structuring this as a coalition of the willings that enable us to basically work and support the leadership of the most willing countries, such as Seychelles, for instance, or Kenya, who's been, of course, you know, very vocal on the blue economy. I hope that, you know, South Africa becomes more and more so active in that space, and that eventually will create some sort of like effet d'entraînement, how do you say, like a you know, snowball effect, some sort of, where eventually, and in fact it's already happening, where other countries, and I'm not going to say any names here, who before they were not necessarily sort of the most willing, they're starting to realize that they might have more to gain to join the movement rather than to stay out. Right? Now, of course, it's our job to make sure that we do actually create the business case for regenerative blue economy, because as I just said, right now it's still much more of a concept than a reality, yet we all know that it can become a reality, because in many places it already is, just not at the scale that required. But that's our job, right? And that's exactly one of the reasons why we're here today, is to see like how can we actually accelerate that demonstration so that they really realize that indeed there is money to be made, there is, you know, good reputation to be made, there is soft power to be gained by actually sort of joining and really spearheading this. So that's the strategy, is to avoid those waters.
Hi, thank you. I just wanted one question. My name is Tony, I'm from Mauritius. I missed a little bit of your session, maybe you've mentioned that. So the idea is to channel the capital and the funds through IUCN, because some projects are quite small in the different region or areas. So IUCN will get the funding, and then the funding will be dispersed to the different projects, right?
Well, not really, actually, because as it is right now, at least for the Western Indian Ocean region, we are trying to catalyze $15 billion of funding. I can guarantee you that if that goes through IUCN, it's going to be a disaster. So no, that's not the goal. Of course, you know, some of it will go through IUCN, or for actually not so much through IUCN. What currently we are doing is we're establishing the governance of the initiative, with, you know, a steering committee that will be led, you know, by the countries, etc., etc. So that will be the governance body, and then there will be a fiduciary sort of body that will, you know, eventually handle some of that funding. It might very well be that some will go through IUCN, but in fact, most of it, I would say like 99% of it will go directly through other means, partners, through regional blue bonds, to debt for nature swap, through, you know, investment fund, etc. Investment fund, for instance, is not something that IUCN can manage. We're not a bank, we're not an investment fund. That would be, as I said, you know, a disaster. So now, what we can do, though, of course, is just to sort of trying to inject this initial funding, which usually is mainly grant funding, to really sort of take that off the ground, and then really sort of enable the partners to actually receive. Like, for instance, you know, when we talk about blue economy, most of the funding will have to go directly to the partners, to the entrepreneurs, to the ventures, and eventually through well, maybe some financial institutions, or maybe we need to actually set up an investment fund, or whatever that would be. And that's exactly one of the points of today, is like, how can we make sure that those billions of dollars that we're trying to catalyze do not go through IUCN, but rather, you know, through those specific mechanisms that will, you know, respond to the needs, the priorities of the countries and of, again, local stakeholders. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand how this is mainly the issue when there's like money from EFIs, etc. It only trickles to government, and government have their way of doing things. So now what you're saying is you want to trickle the money, whatever money there is, to like entrepreneurs. So what I'm asking is, how do you make that possible? And I think that's what
Great. That's exactly why we're having this session today, is to respond to this type of question. I don't want to come up by myself. You know, I could cook a response, but I think, you know, the brains in the room right now are actually probably the right one to help us craft which type of mechanism that you exactly sort of point. How can we make that work? So that's exactly the point of that workshop today.
Is this on? Thomas, just perhaps carrying on with that question, you talk about the governance structure that you're busy establishing with the steering committee. I was just interested, what makes up that steering committee? Is that the governments that have signed up to Great Blue Wall, or how do you see that working?
It's currently in development, so I don't want to preempt or anything. We are hoping to have like a first sort of craft of the governance structure by probably the end of March or mid-March. What I want to make sure, though, is that it's not just led by government, because I don't think that's what we want to create, is to rather create a multi-stakeholder type of steering committee, where not only the government, obviously, because that's why we have government, is to actually lead at that scale, in particular also at the regional level, this type of transformational agenda. But I want to make sure that at the table there is also the youth, there is indigenous people, there is, in a way or in another, the private sector, without, of course, falling into the trap of the conflict of interest. So we're going to have to be a bit innovative here. But yeah, to make sure that, again, and then there is science, obviously scientists need to have a seat at the table. In fact, if you ask me, the nature of IUCN in itself, just a small digression, when the father of the United Nations, they've created the United Nations, they realized that, or they thought, which I think was quite smart, that nature and the natural resources goes beyond the mandate of a government, because the government, they change, they move, etc. It's too important just to give it alone to the government. So they've decided they would create actually an independent organization that would not only respond to the government, but also to the civil society and to the scientists. That's exactly why they've created in 1948, the IUCN. So that's why our membership is actually multiple. Now, I want to make sure that we sort of, in a way, replicate this nature for the Great Blue Wall, because, again, the Great Blue Wall is not just for government. It's, in fact, first and foremost for the local communities, the local entrepreneurs. Of course, without denying any of the mandate and the role of the government, because they do have their very important role to play. But again, and of course, we want to make sure that science and the youth and indigenous people, they also have right from the start a seat at the table, because otherwise they're just going to get lost in translation.
And so you're going to create the steering committee in March, you say, but hasn't the Great Blue Wall already generated quite a lot of resources?
Yes. So, yeah. So as it is, the resources that have been channeled through IUCN, I mean, not the ones that are currently being committed. Indeed, about 2 weeks ago, Canada, for instance, they announced $30 million of commitment to the initiative. That will go through IUCN. But that will actually help set up all those different sort of structures and sort of in particular like seascapes and some of the restoration activities, etc. More like a seed funding for us then to be able to sort of scale that up once the proper establishment of the governance is in place, etc., etc. And in fact, the governance will also inform and help manage properly that type of funding. There is also France who have committed the funding, the Germans, and now there is others who are coming in with much larger pot of funding.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the explanation about the Great Wall, Blue Wall funding. I am from Common Market for Eastern and Southern African countries. I'm Joseph Mamo. As you know, there are regional economic communities. Those they are overlapping. Sometimes we are working together, for instance, with Indian Ocean Commission, IGAD, EAC, SADC, and COMESA. We collaborate on most of the projects related to fisheries and aquaculture. And now, almost all of us, the 4 regions, we have developed a blue economy strategy for the region. And the COMESA is also one of the regional economic community that developed this strategy. And as you know, regional economic communities are established with a treaty of member states. And the member states has got its own obligations and mandates to implement projects of common goal. And as per your explanation, this project needs the participation of different countries, more than one country, because it is a natural resource, and that natural resource is cross-country. And these regional economic communities do work with member states, stakeholders, and also non-governmental organizations. Once this kind of projects, once we are able to access this kind of fund, we can easily coordinate the non-governmental organizations, cooperatives, associations, and also governmental organizations. And then we can implement cross-country projects, and we can come up with projects of large funding. Is it possible for you also to fund regional economic communities, or is it possible for regional economic communities to access fund through IUCN? Thank you.
Oh, the short answer is yes, of course, and indeed we are in discussion with IGAD, with SADC, with EAC, and IUC as well. And in fact, we didn't mention that, but in fact, currently the Great Blue Whale Initiative is being co-facilitated and led with UNECA, so the Economic Commission for Africa, which is more like the Continental Economic Commission. And the intention is very much also to be able to support this type of regional bodies as well in being able to sort of spearhead the type of work that you guys are doing. Yeah, absolutely.
We take a last question. Oh, exactly the same. Okay, cool. Well, okay, we take a last one then.
Thanks, Thomas and Peter for the Great Blue Whale Initiative, and I see lots of money coming, probably in Africa or the region, and just looking at this discussion that we have just started having in this room, I was just wondering in terms of you have talked about being in the process of developing the governance structures, and probably. This is a brainstorming session, and probably that could have been one of the topics to look into in terms of how the governance structure will look like, given that from the previous conversation, this is Pan-African, and they probably want to have an approach where we have a regional element in terms of, operationalization of the Great Blue Whale Initiative. And for instance, we could talk about the Western Indian Ocean region, we could have to talk about the Atlantic and all that. So depending on the scope. And then from there, we should be able to say, okay, what do we have? Because we are building on already existing initiatives and already existing frameworks, and probably it can be easy to plug into what's existing, and probably provide some resources to see how we can make it even much better. So probably we could think of an extra group, just to help in terms of getting these ideas from this meeting. Thank you.
Yeah. So just on the governance, as I mentioned, there is currently a consultant actually who's being charged and is currently leading the development of the governance of the initiative. So that's not what we're going to talk about today, because we cannot, otherwise we would just sort of spend probably hours and hours just on that. So that's not the goal of today's session. That's why we are currently sort of has already, I think, like 25 sort of one-on-one sessions with people and government and civil society and whatnot and partners. So that's a parallel ongoing piece of work, which it's not that it's not interesting, it's not that it's not important, it's just not what we're going to focus on today. But yeah, it is a very important point. Yeah.
All right, maybe we can break in 3 breakout groups, breakout tables. So they are like 3, we will divide in 3 type of projects. The first one is coastal community projects. I will be the one facilitating that table. Second one is high-tech, high-growth type of projects, will be Nassima, raise your hand, and then Clemens infrastructure. So I suggest that coastal community, people who are used to work with coastal communities, we come this way. Maybe high-tech, high-growth more in the middle, and then infrastructure on the left.
What's the time? 45 minutes. Yeah, let's say 45 minutes, so it's like 3:15. So let's say 4 o'clock we'll kind of break off the groups, then everyone can have a break. And then we can come back and finish off the session. J'ai oublié de te demander, vous avez déjà défini des criteria for what would be eligible dans chaque truc? Ça fait partie justement de la discussion maintenant.
De quoi ils ont ici aujourd'hui? Le déboursement, le mécanisme. Ok.
Toi, tu tournes, tu tourneras sur les tables, c'est ça?
Ouais, je peux le voir.
I was expecting, I think, more startups as well.
I proxy for them.
Okay.
I think there's somewhere else.
So you are startups too, right?
Me, no.
No? Okay, but I think we will do a round of intro. I'm just going to get, I think there is one startup from Oiche that was supposed to be here.
I can ask you if you want some startups?
Yeah,
Rather have
let's
them?
get some startup.
Yeah,
of course.
absolutely, yeah.
Let me see if I can.
Ça va? Bien?
Alexi was very strict with who he wanted where. Like,
To be fair, I think I signed up for a different session when I registered, but I changed my mind.
Yeah, we got you. Lucky us.
We were all bullied into the fisheries one.
Yeah, but then we split. Let's put it this way. I'm so interested in this shark safe area. I didn't realize that there was a South African shark man freediving with sharks. With great whites, at least.
South Africa.
Yeah.
I thought it was.
I googled it. Hello. Hi.
Which book is it?
I think I do.
You have 2 minutes? We're already late. Okay.
It sounds like. Are we in the minority not speaking French?
Only one. Better than you.
How's your French?
Poorly. Oh my goodness. You're going to have to speak English just for our benefit.
everyone else speaks French?
No.
Oh.
Unfortunately, we can move.
No.
This becomes the French table then.
Always in the
I did see there is a francophone session tomorrow, isn't there?
Yeah.
Or Thursday, maybe. I will not be attending.
Thursday, you're right, yeah. So we start, we wait. Okay, so maybe we do a quick round of introduction. Okay, so I'll start. So I'm Nassima, I'm based in Mauritius. I have several hats. I'm on the board of Ocean Hub Africa. I am an angel investor, and I also represent an organization called Living Lab Federation, where we build impact acceleration program. Over to you.
Me?
Yeah.
Hi, my name is David. I also have several hats, but not as good as her. No, I'm joking. I'm mostly involved with Teka, who you were earlier in the morning. I've been part of the team making Teka up, so I guess in a way I'm a founder, but not necessarily the one we want at the table. And I've worked more broadly with a company called BFA Global. That's a innovation platform that works both in oceans but also in other climate challenges. And I've been in the past the founder of several startups. So hopefully I can have a voice.
Hi, my name is Thomas. I work for IUCN. I'm the regional head for coastal and ocean resilience. I'm based in Kenya, and I've been coordinating the Breakout initiative.
Hi everyone, I'm Kasha. I work for Abalobi. I'm a project manager there, and I'm focused on fisheries monitor platform. So the rollout and carry through of that in several locations.
My name is Cara. I also work with Abalobi. I'm another international projects manager. I focus on our Fisher to Marketplace rollout, and my background is as a marine biologist.
Cool. My name is Olaf. I work for GIZ, more specifically for a project called Make IT in Africa, dealing with entrepreneurship support, but mainly there through intermediaries, so working a lot with innovation hubs and
accelerator programs, and so on. And in the past, I've had my own startup, and I come originally from IT services.
Very good. So I think maybe to start, question will be more for you and with the people with the experience as a former startup founder is to understand the problem that you are facing today on the ground, and particularly in terms of funding. Maybe that would be interesting for us to get that feedback.
Why don't you start with that? Do you want to speak to Monitor?
Sure. Problems on the ground, I guess, for us have been scaling quickly. So I think in a lot of our organizations, or at least from my experience, capacity is slow or little. Especially so my platform is a tech platform, and so it involves different skill sets. So tech sort of software developers, etc., quite expensive resources. And so initially starting out as a non-profit, I was slow to get on the ground. And so scaling then up to a platform that is applicable to different contexts and can be globalized has been challenging. I guess boots on the ground, from me, for a personal perspective, is I think that really being embedded in a community and being able to assist means that you need to be there often and regularly, and you need to show face and you need to engage and be able to. So specifically for us, we do a lot of data feedback for the communities. It's a critical aspect, and so just funding that sort of work. So mostly capacity, I guess, if I can summarize that into one word.
I would say, I mean, your second point about boots on the ground, I think, is very important. I've just at the end of last year, I spent a couple of months in Palau, working with the fishing communities, and I found that it gave the Palau project such a massive head start. But it is a time investment. You know, it is 2.5 months where my focus is 100% on one project, while we can't be managing 8 different international projects. That is, ideally we'd have one person on the ground in each of our countries, but that's an additional salary for 2-3 months at a time or whatever, preferably a year at a time at least. Another thing that I think is quite a bit of a challenge is that we're running pilots in all our international deployments. That's vital. You have to do sort of an experimental kind of phase where you do scoping, where you find out, you do interviews with restaurants, with fishers, you do impact measurement, etc. However, a pilot is by definition, you're not going to do a full-scale sort of investment for just a pilot. But I think that in order for that pilot to be assessed as successful enough to scale, you need to do a little bit more investment, So it's a little bit of a catch-22 where you need to invest enough into this pilot to allow scaling, but you can't invest too much because it's a pilot. So, what if it's just deemed not a good fit? So I do find that that cycle is a little bit frustrating to break out of. Like if you invest 100% into something, it's not giving it the chance to to learn and to assess. You might be forcing a fit that isn't necessarily a good one. So that's where I think I'm encountering a challenge.
Can you elaborate, because this is very important, the pilot phase?
Yes.
Because let's say tomorrow we give you funding and you can do your pilots in the 10 different countries of the Red Blue World.
Yes.
But how then do you think that Abalobi will be able to use this pilot and scale in each of these countries? Do you have an idea?
Well, I can tell you what we normally do. So at the moment, when we do a pilot project in a country, we generally do a tech configuration. So we adapt the apps for the specific context. For example, we do translations, we add all the species necessary, etc. So there's that necessary tech that has to happen. That's it's got a pretty firm timeline. It's quite simple. Then we have to do a lot of community engagement. That's vital, absolutely vital, in order for any project to succeed. We also do our sort of main measurable goal in a pilot is to do marketplace runs. So we in encourage the fishers, we teach them how to use the app, we explain the benefits, we change it according to their needs. Then we map out a logistical process flow. So we figure out how does the fish get from the fisher who logs the catch on the app to a restaurant that will be using. Then we do practice runs, and once we've done those several practice runs, which are called marketplace trials, then we sit down and we assess. Then we learn from that. And that's the stage where we have to see if this is a good fit for the context, or if it, maybe a different tech platform is a better fit for that community. So we have quite a sort of a solid
you do
pilot.
the validation and then
Exactly. Scoping is a big part of that. So it is figuring out, doing interviews, doing workshops, doing
I think a big part, maybe just to add to that, is we don't necessarily enter into a communal project if we don't have community buy-in into it. And in order to get that buy-in, again, we need boots on the ground, the face there, someone who engages often, really dives deep into understanding what it is that is applicable in that context.
Absolutely. So, yeah.
We're going to move to the others, but before I'm done with you, and please feel free to ask questions as well. I really like the approach because it seems to be really based with the feedback from the community, but at the end, IUCN or the Great Blue Whale will finance Abalobi, and Abalobi will then redisburse that money. The real need of those communities are to increase their salaries or the money that they have. How does that work at the moment? I mean, the balance, let's say if Abalobi receive more funding, it's what we scale more, or we try to give more money as well to the local community. There's a strategy in place, or I know you're not Serge, but
next best thing.
We can do our best.
I guess from my side, so I guess from Cara's perspective in marketplace, we try and keep as much of that value retention within the community. I think you can speak more towards marketplace, but for our monitor platforms, we really try and incorporate community members to do that monitoring. So for every project, the bulk of the funding goes into data collector salaries. They in turn are fisher wives, so most of the time they're fisher wives and fisher families, and so that's really embedded into the community. It's a huge part of what we do. Also do a lot of research in standardizing that and understanding how to work out that rate, what's a fair wage for this work, and then in turn those community members are upskilled. Eventually we'd like to get to the point where they can present back the data they're collecting, and fed back to them, back to the fishers, on the app, on the tech platforms, and it's easily accessible. So I think that's the important part for us. It's not us doing it, it's the community. Yeah.
Thanks.
Sorry.
You can take a break. David, thanks. I see your startup are here. Bolu as well. So question for all the startup. We're going to skip the part of your introduction. What is the main challenge today that you're facing in terms of funding? challenge?
Yeah.
Let me tell you.
So, like, speaking from my personal experience, it's just, I think, understanding the tech itself, that pushing deeper to the community. Because I don't have a background in tech, I'm a lawyer by profession. So, just having to go backwards and doing all that research, understanding what type of tech is compatible with our solution, what is available to us. Do we have to reinvent something, or do we already pick up things that are there? So I think for us as a very early stage startup, currently that's the main challenge that we have, understanding what tech is there, how we can apply to our solutions, and simplify it enough for the community to access and to use efficiently.
So maybe for the other startup, I think there's two categories. There are the advanced one, the Abalobi. They've been there for a while, I don't know how many years, but they are in 12 different countries. And then there are the new one, I guess in your case, very, very early stage, but then a bit more pre-seed, seed stage. So what is the need that you will require after have been through a TECA or an Ocean of Africa or another accelerator? What is the real need out of, if we don't consider the funding, what do you really need to scale? What is missing for you? Is it the leadership? Is it what? The strategy on how to scale? What is it exactly?
Because you're in the question implying you will fund the scaling?
Yeah, I think for them, it's not only a question of funding. I mean, me as an investor, they're too young, so I need to have some kind of guarantee what kind of assistance they can get to ensure that they will be able to deliver as well. The money we give them, but to do what?
Yeah, I think just picking up from where I was going, maybe I don't have to like fully understand the tech deeply myself. So we could just get the expertise that's already someone who already has the experience. So we don't have to like start from scratch.
So you need to bring to them some entrepreneur in residence, engineer entrepreneur in residence here. The other startup?
And definitely, I think infrastructure is like one of the major needs. So in Kenya, everything is being exported. So it's not even being processed at a large scale commercially. So what's being processed, what we showed you on stage, is very on the small scale, and those equipment were actually sponsored by other companies before. So for me, companies that want to set up infrastructure, that could be great. So companies like your obviously, that want to be based in Kenya, hiring Kenyans would be amazing for the community at large. Secondly, also them getting better wages, and that can happen through better infrastructure to get the quality up to standard. So the two go hand in hand to help both of those things. So I think that is my thinking.
Thank you. Startups?
Yeah, I just want to talk about funding before we go to what we need. The funding issue, what we found, okay, we're in a startup, we're doing pivoting, we're in an early stage startup. It's regarding with mangrove management, reforestation, with the carbon economy model for local communities, with a platform to crowdsource information of ecosystem, mangrove, seagrass, etc. So the issue is with VC, I mean, we don't have enough like a business model to go to venture capital. And then we obviously need people who value the impact, because we don't really have a business model. And I think for me, that's where, this funding, which is more from DFI, through IUCN, etc., could be of help, because we don't have a venture that we can go to VC and say, invest in us, because we're not really creating a lot of money. We're creating just enough money maybe to go around, but we're making a lot of impact. So then for us is how can we link the impact more to financial instruments to be able to say, okay, this has got this type of impact, I'm happy to give 2 to 3 million. And then the problem is, because our project is a little bit ocean action research, because we don't know who can be entitled to the carbon credit for mangroves in one community. I mean, does it go to the villagers? What radius? So we need to do action research, and this is obviously the money is not big enough for us to tap into this grant funding. So we've been accepted project for GCF, but they told us, $2 million is too little.
we're not even going to look at your thing because $2 million. But we say, this is pilot, we want to do it properly, learn from it, and then we scale it and we can build it to a $100 million project. So these are the two things: is we are there for impact, we're not there for money, so it's difficult to get funding. And then secondly, and when we go to this funding, we say it's too little. We can't look at your thing. So yeah, this is the main thing.
Sorry, to better understand, but is it then that at this stage you don't see that you can actually sort of make money with it, or is it that the organization that you're setting up will painting an extreme picture for all eternity be reliant on grant funding?
Yeah, so the thing is a bit of a catch-22, because if we want to monetize it, it will take us longer to get the solution out there, because we need to take some money from people and the user growth might be small. We wanted to make it, to enter this, use it freely and without having to, pay anything to use it, etc. So we want the platform to have as many users, but as soon as you monetize it, then that sort of reduce the usage of the growth of the users on the platform. So, and then that's why the problem is, do we want to make money, or do we want the solution to go out as quickly as possible to make impact? So this is the problem is, yeah, I can make money, but then, what about when you get to the impact in 3 years' time instead of 1 year?
I think maybe
So this is the problem.
Olaf's point, and what we're trying to do is to get funding, but for bankable projects. So even if you are at the inception phase, you also need to, when you speak to a TFI, GIZ or AFD, you will need to show that you are bringing profitability and not pretending just impact. Otherwise, yeah, you are just going to be dependent
This is for me a big problem that we need to address. As you want to make something bankable, then it's like, okay, we say to me, do you want to get 1 million profit, or you want to save like lives of 50 people? I mean, 1 million is better. Okay, I don't can make 1 million, I can save 50 lives of 50 people. So you don't give me money because I can't make 1 million. Okay, then it's a problem.
Maybe just on this, because I think for us it's very important that we sort of realize that there's just, whether we like it or not, there's just not enough grant funding out there for us to be able to achieve whatever needs to be achieved. So we need to find ways to really or unlock basically commercial, so non-grant funding into positive impact. Not really sort of is done that what to crack is how can eventually we can use grant funding to unlock that non-grant funding, but we cannot just keep repeating this sort of model where we just run on grant funding, because otherwise what's going to happen is nothing's going to happen.
Exactly.
Very little compared to the, and indeed, I think numbers now, but basically, when you compare to sort of the level of investment that has been put in terms of grant funding compared to what is available currently on the capital market, which is like trillions of dollars, $13 trillion, if we manage to make that work for impact, then we're good, because then literally we actually have the funding.
So I get what you're saying. So for me, the solution will be to connect financial instrument with impact. Like we've connected financial instrument with carbon. So today you can trade carbon and you can make money, you can go have contracts. So, but carbon is only one commodity, but it's intangible, but it's traded. So we should develop another something, we call it whatever, blue whatever. We have blue carbon, but we can call a positive impact, we can commoditize it and monetize it. So any, okay, put it like saving lives of people. Okay, lives of people. Yeah, so let's say 1 life of people is worth $1 million. So I'm saving 50 lives of people. So when someone can get a contract, go to a market and say, this project is saving 50 lives, it's worth $50 million. So give him the money, I'll put the money and whatever. So we should develop like a financial instruments that links to impact, same way we do for carbon. But use carbon as a model to be able to really commoditize or commodify the impact, so we can make commercial markets.
Thank you. Thomas, maybe it is important that you give, for the the startup here, can you give your definition of what will be a bankable project? What kind of return we expect to have?
No, well, unfortunately, it's not me who's going to define that. It's going to be the investors. But I think, ultimately it will have to be, well, sort of reasonable so that they're actually willing to invest. I would say, like at the very least, sort of cover the inflation rate because they want to lose money. Maybe make a bit of money, a bit of cash flows currently. Even if you actually invest in the national treasury sort of type of thing, you're not going to make so much money. So most of them they're actually quite willing to do that, but only and only if it is as less risky than buying euros on the capital market, right? Which in fact now is becoming more and more risky. No, but that's true actually.
But more promising as well. But more promising as well.
Right, yeah, well, no, but that's the thing, is that actually there is a very interesting move currently that's happening, is that they are realizing what they thought was secured funding is becoming less and less secured, and so now they are realizing, oh well, maybe we can actually put it into something that is maybe perceived as more risky, but actually sort of more premise to actually sort of deliver, and in fact it might be not so risky. But again, only and only if we manage to de-risk it as much as we can so that they feel comfortable that, okay, yeah, we're ready to actually put money into this.
But maybe exactly to that. So what I'm seeing quite a bit is the de-risking part, I think, is important for, I don't know, day 1 to day make any number. But at some point, you will need to sort of have a reasonable return. And I might be wrong, but the sort of, if I talk to angel investors, and I'm not even talking VCs, they need something like somewhere between 3 to 10x. That's at least sort of what they would be looking at. Again, not like towards what you were saying, not at day 1, but at some point in time, they will want to make a profit because they have cost of transaction and so on. Sorry, one sentence. And I feel that if we acknowledge this, I think there can be models of how you can achieve this. There is, like, maybe not a B2C or B2B direct model, but like go a bit the extra mile.
When you were saying through 10x, or when you're talking to investors, like, what's the horizon, right? Because that's also important. There's a percentage of return, but then there's the length of the period that you're investing into the company. So what are we talking about here? Patient capital, I'm hoping.
Well, it can be anything really, anything that you need. It's our job to come up and say, like, okay, well, we need this type of funding, this type of maturity to deliver on this, and then parallel maybe more like patient type of capital over 20 years, whatever that would be. Yeah, it's
that's the design parameter.
Right now, anything is possible.
On another break, I think actually for these companies, it's really 5 years to 7 years thereabouts. That's when there's eventual exits. I think that's in terms of the length. I think that's
7 to 10, yeah.
But I think I will take out the VC and business angel because indeed they will look for higher return, and for that they can get them either directly with the startup or they can have them through the incubator accelerator. I think here it's more to focus on the impact people, the impact that also trying to do impact investing and raise the return, but then the return will remain low, something below 8%. And then you don't get this kind of investor. It's more a DFI, or it's more a bank, or a Leonardo DiCaprio Foundation, something like that. These kind of people, I think that we are more willing to target. And then, because even when you look at OHA, I see the range between, they might have maybe 2 startups that are indeed could potentially offer that 3x, 5x, but the rest, you won't even get the 2x because we are not there yet. So it's a reality.
But isn't that again down to sort of time frames?
Yeah. Yeah.
Just asking, right? Because I think, sure, at a certain point in time, it's going to be complicated, and it's going to be, like you're saying, it's going to take longer. But in order to build this in a sustainable way, as in also sort of the model can continue, and I don't know, probably to also look at something like a revolving fund or something. I think you probably will have to have this discussion about profitability at a certain point in time, because otherwise you just forego so much of the potential market.
No, I think the exercise is good to have that horizon and to see the different return on investment and then say, okay, I think by the time we get the money by the end of this year, we need to start deploying next year. And we will have, what, 2030 is not that far, but are we going to get, what, how many percent next year of these high growth, high return, how many percent, and that number will increase, hopefully, because we will give more money to these guys or to the OHA and directly to, directly to other people.
Fingerprint is also fine.
But maybe to accelerate in what was exactly the question, so how do you see, how can we help to, how do you use that word, disaggregate? Disaggregate those big fundies into those startup directly. So what
what's
will
going
be your...
to happen is that currently what we're envisioning is that we'll probably sort of set up regional financing mechanisms such as like blue bonds or these type of things that will catalyze the billions of dollars. But to make sure that they don't stay up there, we need to find ways to de-aggregate them and channel them towards startups and coastal communities and really sort of the local entrepreneurs. So that's the really sort of, because otherwise what's going to happen, it's already happening in many other initiatives, that then there is a big player, you know, a big bank or whatever, they take some of that bond and they say, okay, now we have lots of money, but we cannot do anything below $5 million or $10 million. Which is not something that Tabalobi can, for instance, can absorb, or anyone around the table, right? And yet, who's actually delivering impact? It's the people around the table. And they actually need that money, much more than, you know, the guy who can actually absorb the $10 million. So that's the nut that we want to crack, is that how can we de-aggregate that and actually make it available to you guys? So which type of funding, which size of funding, and of course, you know, what would come in handy and useful for startups and ventures like you guys. And of course, the other side of the same coin is that then how can we maybe guarantee or somehow sort of lower the risk for the investors so that they're actually willing to do that? Or find ways that they don't tell us, no, I cannot do anything below 5 million, 10 million.
I think we'll try to right now. It should be true accelerators and incubators that literally not out these startups. They know the challenges, they know where they need to take supports. And I used to say you shouldn't give money to these big banks. The people that such capital should be disseminated through people that are day in, day out incubating this, this stuff. They are the ones that have direct contact. They know what steps they need to the capital to work for, and they can channel it to. I think that's the closest solution to it, because these guys interact with startups in hundreds, and they know the ones that have potential. They have totally risked at that point.
And I assume, I hope we get billions, but they last only so long, right? And we will love to leave a legacy behind, a self-sustaining system at that point, right? So with that in mind, I think there's no going around enabling, empowering, starting intermediaries, I think per your point, that can maybe learn with this money, can step up one level as much as they can, right? But also attract other type of funding, maybe from business angels that are de-risked, because some of this funding is concessionary, right? But then they figure out, oh, well, actually it wasn't such a bad opportunity. Now I can, the second time or the third time, I can come in without any help, because now I've learned. Because if the legacy is a network of operators, incubators, accelerators, early stage funds, mid stage funds, growth funds, if all of that infrastructure is left in place, then with a track record, it could self-fund in the future. And the question is, what is required? I don't have an answer. But what is required in the blue economy?
I think so. Basically, what you're saying that the best placed people to support startups such as the one you're on the table would be the incubators and the accelerators. So now the question is.
We don't give funding, huh? We just support.
Yeah,
Well,
but
it depends.
now the
We
question
give
would be
funding.
then,
If we give
how
them
can
money.
we empower?
The more money I have, the more I'll give.
I would think, right?
For example, this is the neutral example that I'm remember when we were starting, we were with a program by the King of Ireland, it's called Orange Colors Program. So it's a combination of training and state funding. Alright? We're about 20 in the program, but they only funded 5. At the initial stage, they gave us very small money to do 20. So we implement, they look at what you're doing, the projection, and at the end, at the stage of that program, they're going to give just 5 who have showed potential, who have defined the goal, and they say that there's clarity. And so, we're 20, they gave 5, and beyond that 5, after about, I guess, 18 months or 1 year, 12 months thereabouts, they're also going to look at you, and at that point, they're talking about internalization of what you're doing, like you go out to other countries and the likes, and they also going to support you on funding. So, if such systems are available, you are looking at startups that have the right model, right numbers and the likes, and totally de-risk that process. Because you are not just pumping out the money to them. There are people that you see the track record, the antecedents, what they're doing.
I agree with you. Maybe a bit of an introduction. I'm also a founder of a startup. I'll be sharing more tomorrow. But when you talk about having an accelerator program that is long-term, our startup has been a beneficiary of that, where we did receive funding, but we also received support, and it was 2 kinds of support. There was general coaching, where we had general classes on general topics, and there was personalized coaching, where we had a mentor take us through the steps. And the mentorship is really what changed the direction of our startup, just because it was personalized and this person was able to pay attention, as opposed to being in a Zoom of 10 or 20 people, and it's very general focused. One thing we were struggling with that was making us very unbankable was setting up systems, and so we didn't have a clear understanding of where our money was going or how to measure our impact in that. And the person who was assigned to our team helped us be able to clarify that really well, to a point where we were able to sort of move to the next level. That's even when we have discussions internally, that was the most transformational part of our journey. But also having a runway. I have started a couple of startups that I've had to drop off from, mainly because I didn't have survival ability, like we didn't have salaries, we couldn't keep up with rent and things like those. So it was very hard to try to figure out your life and also try to run a startup. And so the runway has helped us focus fully on it. And the outcome has been now, when we started out, we were 0% fully funded fully, and currently we're about 65% relying on grant funding, and this other percentage, which is 35%, is money that we're able to generate as revenue.
After how a period of
6 months.
6 months.
Yes. So when we look at it that way, with the plans that we have, we see that because of this support we received, it's coming to an end in March. There's a competition, so if we don't win, it comes to an end in March. But if we could get the runway maybe to extend us for a year or something of the sort, we would be able to have maybe 50-50 by the end of the next calendar year, and then be able to grow that so that within maybe the next 5 years we're fully dependent on our business model and the long-on funding. So the most important part of this entire process has been the mentor who was able to be intimate with us and look at that. And I've been part of several programs and we never receive that. It's usually very general and very surface level, where they're like, oh, do you have a business model, or have you filled out the business canvas, which if you've passed exams, it becomes very easy to do because you can play around with words. But to get somebody who really sits down with you and calls out the BS that can exist in this beautiful presentation, I think that is more important than, not important than the money, but equally as important as the money. So I totally agree. If you have programs that are long-term. So some programs go for 3 months or 6 months, and then at the end of the program, they leave you and they walk away, and it's like, okay, good job, go change the world, which is like, I'm still a child, I need a little more guidance, so please guide me for maybe 2-3 years and leave me at a point where I can actually walk. So for startups, I think that, to your question earlier, that's what I would be looking for as a founder. Yeah.
Can we say that one of the biggest challenges would be governance? Whether you're the one getting the funding or you're the startup, because even startups don't really have a governance structure. I'm not talking about corporate governance, because even that is a lot of freedom of approach, but a sense of governance that meets all these desires of the founders. If you're thinking about monetizing impact, if you're thinking financial impact and social impact, I think there's such a set of governance that needs to come into play for it to be capital. So I think that's the mechanism that can be brought up. Of course, you're getting the right kind of people, the right skill sets, and even the money that you're thinking about instead of individual banks. Because one of the big reasons why most companies banks come back and say, we need regional banks. And here's your capital plus this. I know many instances, someone was telling me a story about the big bank in Kenya. The founder saw that MasterCard Foundation was given to this. So then they had a counter for women. So they went and established a counter just for women in the counter. It doesn't mean that only women can use this counter. It means anyone can use this counter, but if a woman moves into the bank and she's in the counter back, she gets first priority. And just by doing that, they unlocked funding for online lending to small businesses, small startups, whatever it is. So those are the things, but the people who are giving the money know that we're going to get XXX. These are the parameters that are going to be met. So it all comes down to creating some mechanism of governance from the top, including in the startups that will be funded through this process.
If I could maybe add something that, sorry, a little bit different, but tying in from the networking and there's something you mentioned about mentorship. I think Abelobi had a bit of a different approach initially, where instead of accessing funds from big grants ourselves, because we couldn't do with 5 million, 10 million, we could only maybe work with 2 million. We tacked onto other organizations that maybe were a lot larger, like WCS, Blue Ventures, etc., where we could subcontract onto a project and make impact on the ground. But those ties, they're difficult to form, and showcasing that we can actually take on and that we can work in those sort of regional areas was difficult to do initially, and we relied a lot on people coming to us. And so I think maybe for younger startups, or I don't even know if we qualify as a startup anymore, but for younger startups it might be good to facilitate those networking opportunities where you can tack onto larger projects, maybe not running the whole thing, but working in a group towards a broader goal. I'm thinking of the BAF project that we're running in Madagascar now, alongside Blue Ventures, Mihari, who's also here, and sorry, I forgot a few of the other partners now, Aga Khan Foundation. It's a whole conglomerate that's working towards a common goal of establishing an MPA in the Barren Isles. But that's what you need, expertise from so many different organizations. You can't do everything. I think that's a hard lesson we've learned in the past.
That's a really intriguing idea. Like if there could be a facility that subsidizes or funds contracts between startups and maybe non-profits, conservation non-profits, because then it's non-dilutive, it's revenue creating, it's traction creating.
Right.
So that's attractive to an investor who's looking for a proof point. Well, WWF work with them, provided they don't. That would be my caveat for that. That the startup doesn't go out of the way to get this, because you'll do anything to survive. But you should be doing what's in your best interest, not necessarily what WWF wants to do, not picking on them.
Yeah.
But any one client, if it's out of your strategy, you shouldn't do it. If you're so desperate that you'll do anything, then you'll do it, but then you become a consulting firm.
Yeah.
You're not a high growth startup, right? There's nothing wrong with consulting, but
Yeah.
we're talking here high tech, high growth. But subsidizing some of these contracts or making them happen 100% could potentially also unlock some of the innovations that sit within non-profits that they don't know how to spin out. So because they don't know, like no one knows everything, right? And they know what they know and not necessarily launching startups. That would be an interesting idea to bind the ecosystem and have ideas flow, have talent flow, and benefit everyone.
Sorry, so, and maybe to that and what you said, I think it answers a lot of the questions that you have, because on the one hand side, the power that you can actually have is making those connections and also seeing like, okay, there is startup A, startup B, and something else, put it together, then we have the thing that might actually unlock something else. That's the first thing. Second, startups will be in different stages. So what I would see sort of looking at a large amount of money, I would purpose it for different stages. And this is what we've done sort of in the past, where it's like, okay, there is seed funding, and also there sort of as an organization or as a startup be self-critical enough to say, well, maybe 500,000 is a bit much to swallow right now, but maybe 50,000 is actually just right for us to unlock this next stage. But for that, you need to kind of have predefined the next stages, because otherwise, I need 500. I need the 500,000 because what am I going to do in 6 months' time, right? So, but there have different stages, and I think then you create a system that can actually work, and then you can also develop something that once you go higher, you have to basically feed back or give back to the community, as in mentoring, as in revolving funds, etc. So.
Where was I? Yeah, so I wanted to share something with you, which is a financial instrument, what came to my mind now. So, I mean, you probably know, some of you, it's the outcome-based contracts. So it's basically, we call it, also we use the term bonds for what? Social impact bonds. So basically, for those who don't know, it's basically when you reach an outcome, then you get paid. Either it's by IUCN, either by DFI, or by the government. So the first one we had was during the prison in England. So the prisoners came out, and then the first impact bond was, they say, okay, I'm an NGO, but I'm going to take these prisoners. Normally 5 prisoners out of 10 goes back, and costs government in 5 years X amount of millions. So I'm telling you, these 10 people, the 5 won't go back. So you give me, out of 10, you give me 5. So we sign a contract, and they don't get any money from the person paying in 5 years' time. We take that contract, we go to an investor. And that's now part of a sort of financial instrument. So I'm saying, if the outcome is of a great blue wall, great, what? Blue wall. Yeah, it can be defined as outcomes, and we can, you can link the money to the impact. Then we can, have some sort of system where we don't need to make money. Because that's for me, it's like trying to put like a square peg in a round hole. I mean, even the people making money today, there's this thing called ESG. Now we suddenly need to make environment, social governance. There are problems with that. Now we're asking impact projects to be completely profitable, which is also a big gap, and to do that. So I think the issue we have is we try to put everything in a capitalist world and run, in a certain way, ROI, banks, loans, profit. Well, impact is a different language. And I think until big organizations like IUCN don't push and advocate for some different type of system, and I'm afraid, a startup, instead of taking 1 year to do impact, will take 5-10 years, because we got shareholders, we got whatever. I mean, that's just my point, to try to in brief, what are the KPIs? Is it 100 kilometers of mangrove reforestation. Yeah, I mean, my projects can do 50. So, you know, then how much money can I get from you? You don't have to give it to me. I can go to an investor, but in 5 years' time, you give it to me if I've proven what I've done it. So,
the bottom line with this is that the issue is that, yes, I do agree, I very much agree, and I do think there is a lot of potential in the impact bond sort of type of instruments. But ultimately, they do rely on grant funding because someone has to pay at the end, and that's usually grant funding. And again,
not necessarily, because it can be also, sorry to have cut you, it can be an asset to government. You know, I'm keeping my mangrove, it can be part funded by you, it can be also blended. You know, and okay, when I'm protecting mangrove, actually my fishermen are getting more fish. And there's a fishing organization who's happy with that and he wants to give money, or she wants to give money. So it's a blended way of doing the things, not only grant, because there's lots of co-benefits. You know, and I think the way we're doing this is going to take us a lot of time.
I think an important definition when we speak high-tech, high-growth, today people think of unicorn. In the case of the Great Blue Wall, we're talking about zebras. And zebras, we're not talking about a 5 years horizon. It needs to be very clear that we're talking above or close to a 10 years horizon. And that goes back to the acceleration program. And when I've heard TECA, it's great, but you're just helping them for 6 months and you're giving them 55,000, and after what?
Yeah.
This is one thing I'm not done.
Sorry. I thought because you looked at me.
No. There is an instrument, and I was mentioning that to Thomas yesterday, called made by IFD, called Catalytic Africa, and that was launched end of last year, which is a grant matching instrument, not for zebra, but for not unicorn even, but normal startup, wherever a business angel, so private money goes into a startup, we can apply for the grant. So it's the opposite. Instead of having the grant and trying to get equity, this time it's equity that attracts the grant. And you can have it multiplied by 2 or 3, but there is a cap. And we were able to get this grant for 2 of our startups. But when I look at this startup, the maturity that they had first, it's because they had that traction that they get the private funding. Otherwise, I mean, we screened 200 of them, and we did not pick up this one because there was not enough traction. And all of them, yes, they've been to the best incubator and accelerator. I mean, you will have an exception, an Abalobi, and probably that will represent 2%, but the rest has to go through.
Abalobi went through our accelerator too.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Was it before or after they started to get private funding?
It was as they were tipping over. Right?
I don't know, I'm talking with Serge.
But I think you're right. I think TECA intervenes in a particular stage. Someone, I think the gentleman over there was more talking about how we need a continuum of that. I don't know, you were saying that, right?
Yeah.
But I don't think it should be the same. I think there are going to be, you want gates, because some people, honestly, they're not serious about it, for example, right? So there should be some cutoff point, and then you go and you enter the next stage with help from some others. At BFA, we have TECA from nothing, before idea, to form company that now is funded to go for a few more months. Then there's Catalyst Fund. Elise mentioned that before. Catalyst Fund takes them later, once there's a product. I do have a question. I would love to hear your thoughts here later over beer. What happens in between the two, right? Per your comment before, you will want some guidance throughout, right? At the same time, you want to say, well, if you're an entrepreneur, you're going to also fly on your own at some point, right? But some point is later. But that's what I was talking about before with the network of players, so that we can be passing the startups that are earning it, that keep on deserving it, keep going from one to another and getting bigger, more sophisticated, faster.
And that goes back to your idea to have that from the origination, people that don't want to make any return but are just impact, to the one that are targeting both high return, high impact, and how can we get the proper
support?
Yeah, support. Yeah. And what are the different needs that
I'm feeling that we are going back to the pipeline building side of the story, which is very important. But the thing is, I think we've been focused focusing slightly too much on that side of the story because now we're getting into somewhere between the incubator, the studio, the launcher, whatever, and we need to do much more of that. But I'm still sort of struggling in finding ways that we can match that pipeline of bankable project with the right funding and non-grant funding. Why? Because here, to be very clear, so we have investors that are softly committing to put $1 billion on the table. Out of the $1 billion, 20% might be grant, the rest will be non-grant. Very concessional, some of it. Maybe the other bit less concessional, but still, yeah. No, my question is, what am I going to do with those, $800 million? So I can't spend the $200 million on grant and things.
Easily,
impact. Yeah, no, that's okay. I can do that. Now the question is, how can I make sure that those $800 million go there to Abalobi, to those guys?
So,
and that's my where I'm struggling still.
So oh, sorry, go ahead. Thomas, my answer to my tentative answer to your question, like the TECA founders are taking a returnable instrument already. We're not granting. We granted them money when they were fellows, so they were a stipend. They never have to return it. It's a donation. Now they're taking $55,000 as a returnable grant as an instrument, which means that only they have to return it if they raise more than $1 million over the next 4 years. Could we shift that to a pure equity? We could, right? So you don't, now, for such an equity bet to yield in 10 years, you need a lot, and you need to wait 10 years because you're putting equity on the table on day one. So they have all the years. Now, but if you help throughout, as you were saying, to speed up, to burn through the stages faster and faster than you would on your own, then maybe 10 years is a horizon where you can start seeing some of the money return. The Catalyst Fund is also funded now with equity, with some sweetening, some grants. So there's blending.
So what are the different instruments that Catalytic are using?
Catalyst Fund?
Yeah, Catalyst.
So Catalyst Fund, this history of it is at the beginning it was pure grants because we didn't know what we were doing. We didn't know if it was worth it. No one wanted to hold the money if it was bad, whatever, right? So it was all grants for the first iteration. Second iteration, we started again with grants, but we shifted to this returnable instrument.
Which returnable instrument?
You can call it a couple of things. You can call it either returnable grant.
Okay.
As I was saying, it's a grant if you don't raise more than X. If you raise more than X, please return the money 0%, right? So a very soft loan. Another, I've heard also it called a forgivable loan, which is the same. Like it's a loan, but I can forgive if you don't raise. That's the next nicest, least dilutive sort of instrument. Catalyst Fund experimented with that. To our surprise, we're seeing some of that money come back. We're very happy. Like, wow, $100,000, nice. What do we do with it, right? We didn't expect so quickly. But
was it like, as you mentioned, revolving fund?
Sort of. Okay. Sort of. This was a deal with FCDO. So if the money came back, then Catalyst Fund could invest it sort of furthering the purpose, the original purpose of Catalyst Fund, with some sort of veto from FCDO that we weren't going to do something funky with the money. that was the second iteration. We learned how to hold money, to start getting a little savvier. This was before, after Avalobby. So sir will never have to reverse that story. But you can send us some fish.
No.
How much did you raise?
Exactly. Let's do the math now. We're gonna have a conversation.
So Catalyst Fund is the brand name.
Catalyst Fund is the brand name, yeah.
Okay.
And
So
then
you're a
the
fund
third-
manager.
Say what?
You're fund
We
manager.
now are a fund manager.
Okay.
Before we were a semi-fund manager because this is an instrument that is not, but yeah, we were holding an instrument. Now, 3.0 Catalyst Fund, the one that my lease is now raising money for, is equity. We've seen that we've invested this money in this portfolio. They've raised 50 times more than we gave them. The valuation is billions of dollars. Like, the hell, we should have invested equity. We didn't know that early on. Now we do. And now we're going to pure equity. I mean, not pure equity because there's a layer of TA and assistance, and so some sweetening of the deal for the entrepreneurs. But it's now an equity instrument for the most part. So we've gone through that evolution, learning and proving, honestly, to ourselves, but also to the investors.
So if I may ask you, your limited partners, what type of profile of it?
So the first one that's anchoring the fund is FSD Africa. You saw Juliet come, the tall blonde woman.
Yeah.
They're anchoring the fund.
It's what type of organization of it?
They are, in a way, an extension. So what?
Public funding.
It's public funding.
Public funding.
There's an
Okay.
extension of
So
FCBO.
it's institutional money.
Institutional money, yeah. This is an institution that, thankfully for us, they're great for blending because they can do grants, convertible loans, whatever, saves, blah, 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 and LP. They can do fund of funds. They are a fund of funds too. So they can deploy all these different instruments so that we can then blend effectively. On paper. Let's see how effective it is at the end.
So they're already a fund of funds.
They're already a fund of funds, yeah.
What is it called?
FSD Africa.
I have a question with regards
FSD
to
Africa.
I have a question with regards to equity in exchange for funding. What happens for social enterprises where if the focus is on an exit or shareholder returns, then it becomes very hard to accomplish their impact mission. And this is based off an example like our startup deals with children, and so we have children from private schools who we charge for the services, and we have children from public schools who have categorically said you could give us 10 years and we could never afford your service. And so whatever we make from the private school goes back into this. So if an investor was to come and ask us for equity, on paper it would exist, but it will also mean that we would have to leave out about 75% of the kids who go to public schools. So how, it's the conflict, especially as a startup founder, like if I take money from venture capital, I could give it back in theory, like the numbers look promising, but that would be at the cost of the impact and reaching out to the people who really are affected by these particular issues. So how do we reconcile that? Because I understand what you mean by grant funding. We can't rely on grant funding forever, but what do we do as social enterprises? Like, I don't want somebody
You're
to say,
ahead of where
give me my profit.
you're ahead of where the instruments are, because you're a blended model. So you need blended finance.
Yeah.
That will be my take.
Yeah,
And,
I agree.
How do you do that? Tricky. There's no instruments really out there that are standard. You need to concoct them, set them as you go. Very difficult. Yeah.
Is there a way to formalize that?
Like for instance, here, how could we use this, for instance, now, because this very concessional non-grant funding and grant funding that we receive, to enable those guys to actually come in, become an equity partner. Of course, they don't only bring just equity, they bring in a network, expertise, etc., which is very valuable, possibly at least for if it's the right investor, right? So we would want that to happen, but what can we do to actually enable that to happen without sacrificing the impact side of the business, right? Because that's why we want them to come and support and scale. So that's where I feel that, again, until we actually crack that nut, we're still in this sort of dichotomy between grant funding impact, non-grant funding, not impact, just money. And I'm like,
that's
yeah, but that's not going to work.
Yeah, I think there's a third category of organizations that have inherent impact in their product or value proposition. As they scale, it gets cheaper, and then you can actually create a lot of impact while returning money, right? You can do that, but not everyone, not every model can get there, right? And I think that we also need to be very clear-eyed. Like, I don't know anything about your startups. I'm not passing judgment, but like if that's the model you want, then you're gonna have to raise the money that's required for that. And if you don't see your scale ever sort of paying for the impact while delivering profits, then you're gonna always be relying on some degree of loans or sort of grants, which is what we don't necessarily want because they're not there all the time, right? But maybe you can make them happen. There are some grants. I mean, WWF always raises grants, right? And they're huge all over the world, and right, it's not a nonsense successful organization. So we shouldn't, I don't think, this is my opinion, completely shut the door on grants. It's just like, be ready to raise that. Can you? Because if you can't, then maybe don't pursue that. Sorry.
I was looking at a different type of instrument. There is an instrument called revenue-based financing, which can be also very interesting because basically you give a debt to the startup and then you will reimburse it whenever you have your revenue, and we agree on that. And I think that will be more for the middle growth startup than the high growth. The way I see it, high growth today, I see a catapult accelerator. They're able to get equity for the startup. Then I see the Ocean Hub of Africa. I see you guys, TECA, then Catalyst. But I think, how can we go even further down to really the community through, I guess it's on the other one, the community panel, but how can we also maybe help these people to become or to have more that entrepreneurial mindset and maybe take some of the community people to also bring some startup or more project program? That's a question I have.
That's a great one.
To me,
that's hard enough for that one.
There is sort of the key there is I don't know how you want to call them, innovation hubs, innovation enablers, whatsoever. And they would actually, in this case, need to start in those coastal communities, to my understanding, to actually understand also maybe the discussion that we're having right now, being able to sort of educate whoever comes there with this great idea. Might it go in the one direction or the other, and then say, okay, those are the mechanisms that are available, those are the metrics that you need to meet in order to, I don't know, account for, what is it, blue carbon or whatever, and then you're probably going to say it goes back to the pipeline topic, because essentially I think also this discussion is in parts pipeline, but looking at it from the other side, looking at it not from the side of how can we groom startups, but what do we need to do in order to provide those steps for the startups. So to me it's a bit like twisting the pipeline idea around and seeing how we can actually support that there is even a pipeline.
Just the education system, there needs to be like people like ministers of education in these organizations to start the curriculum of introducing entrepreneurship in schools. So especially in the blue economy, because in Africa, even fears of there's so much cultural connotation around it, so people can eager to learn from the oceans are really to be citizens, people that have no interest
They'll figure it out.
They don't really look like community people, no?
Not exactly, with too many seats. My take is that you say high tech, high growth, and I think you're implying also high skill.
Yeah.
And the question is, are those skills in the community or not? I don't know. I'm not an expert in communities. If you don't have them, then maybe it's kind of a high skill, high growth. But it can still be entrepreneurial, as Hanga was saying. And maybe that's more franchising or or supplying to others, or I don't know, something that is more less daunting, because I'm sure if we ask all the founders at the table, they're like, half of my day I'm scared shit, right? And then half of the other day I'm forgetting that I was scared, I'm gonna go do my work.
So true.
And if that half, right, gets to 95% of my day, I'm scared shit. That's just you're putting someone through torture. So this, the ambition in a way has to be matching, stretching always, right, for growth, because they can grow, of course. It doesn't matter what skill you're starting, you'll grow as you launch the venture. That's a guarantee. But not grow to the point of break.
Just to add on to, or rather the question that you asked about the community aspect of all this, half of the time that me and my co-founder are scared is because we are really trying to figure out what business model will work for us. Because with our startup being so community-centered and us really going for impact over the profits, if you can say, so it's such a delicate, because no one wants to listen to you if you're not going to make any money. You know, like they'll listen, but they'll be like, okay, but what's, you know, everyone's like, anytime we want to pitch to someone, like, okay, so what's your business model? But then our business model is the community, but we don't want to make them pay because they are the people that we're actually looking to help. So it's such a back and forth, because again, we can't forever rely on grant funding. It's not always going to be available. And then there's also the discourse around carbon credits and all that, and the community itself not even understanding that. So starting from there, honestly for us, that's like the biggest challenge, because we can't really sell impact, you know, like he's saying. So how do we commodify the impact that we are going for?
I have a direct, blunt question for you, that you are dealing with community. What wants the community?
I'm sorry?
What the community is looking for?
Livelihood.
Livelihood,
Yeah. Because we're talking mangroves and we want to kind of keep them out of the mangroves so they're not totally degraded. But we also want to make sure that they're still taken care of, because the community won't stay out because their livelihood depends on the mangroves. So when we're going for the impact that we want to have with them is the alternative livelihoods, but we also don't want to take the money out of their alternative livelihoods. So how do we find that delicate balance where we are also taking care of as business people?
Do you see some willingness for entrepreneurship in the community, or not at all?
No, they are willing. They are willing, yeah. I mean, they have families to take care of. They want to also improve their lives. So, of course, they would be interested, but we also just don't have money to keep putting in from grants. At some point, we're going to have to make money. It's just how are we going to do that? Because even with the Mikoko Pamoja, the Blue Carbon Project in Kenya, the community says, yeah, they are getting benefits from it, but we also, from the stats, we know that 80% of those benefits don't actually reach them. So even as a business, how do we somehow have high impact, but also at a very low cost?
I can maybe add something back to the conversation. Us as startups or non-profits often fill a role that government theoretically should fill in. So we're trying to bridge that gap. And I think maybe a way to bypass the problem of grant funding and profit, in which way do you go, is the aim to eventually step out of your role as that middleman. And so if I'm thinking in our case, I would hope that at some point we have monitoring running and data collection and marketplace and cold chains set up in a community, so much so that they can take ownership of that and communicate directly to their government organizations. This is the data we collect, this is where we
I totally agree with you because that's what we're embedding in our solution, the upskilling of this community so that they are self-reliant and they don't, at some point, hopefully they won't even need us because that's the goal. Absolutely. Yeah. But then again, like you said, governments, politics, they keep changing. Today this government has this policy, tomorrow it's a different president with totally different policies. It's really hard to keep up with them. But yeah, we definitely also are already have a partnership with the Kenya Forest Service. So, but we don't know if they'll pay. Because even when we talk about, yeah, we want to go plant farm, we're like, yeah, you know, there are cost implications to this and we're not covering that cost.
No, it's something that I think everybody faces.
Yeah.
A role that needs to facilitate. If we can reach government to that level and approve, sweeten the deal for them in some way, working with us.
So that's an interesting point because indeed one part of that funding can also go through sovereign debt, for instance, right? Those sort of sovereign debt instruments. So now we can indeed try to make the case that those sovereign instruments could actually come in to do this, what Marcus was saying. But yeah, it's a whole different sort of story, and we work on that for sure. No, but no, it's a very important point. Indeed, we do.
Maybe I can share an organization that has been successful in doing that. It's called Village Reach. They work in healthcare. They've had programs where they set up the programs and then transitioned them to government ruling. So they cover they fundraise for the setup and training and that sort of thing. And then once it's operational, then they're able to scale down the cost. They transfer it to government. So then they're able to take on a different project. We're trying to learn from them because we work in education and we'd like government to take that. But yeah.
The only issue with that though is, again, sort of going back to the investors who want to put non-bank money. If you tell me that story, you're basically telling me that you want to get out of business. So I'm never going to invest into your business because basically you're telling me that you want to close as soon as you can in the business.
Yeah.
Right?
No, not close, exit, I think she said.
Yeah.
Is it close or exit the business?
Exit the business. So
Yeah.
of course government is not going to pay you to exit. They're just going to take over maybe overheads like salaries and that sort of thing. So in the sense of you get a return on investment, probably not. So yeah.
No, it's not
It's a challenge.
But that's solving your issue of not being able to
for the brainstorming.
take on, equity investment.
Yeah.
For those that can take on an equity investment, you stay. But if you can't take on an equity investment, figure out how to.
So we're gonna stop now for the brainstorming. We will continue for maybe half an hour, but tomorrow we need all of you to be here at 2:30, particularly if you're willing to get some of this funding. Because we're taking your name.
Otherwise, you're blacklisted. We can sleep here if it's needed.
There is no guarantee you will have it, but if you want a chance, you need to participate.
Based on this, I'm not so sure that there is something at 2:30, like in open session. We need to check that with Alex, but I think more like in a closed room sort of type of thing. So
Okay.
let's not make any promise here. Not that I don't want to continue not that I don't want to continue the discussion or promise anything.
Is it one of the things in the program? C'est quelque chose sur le programme quoi?
No, that's why
We
I'm
will
saying
see
I
with
think actually
Erlang.
tomorrow it's supposed to be like just among
I see.
like,
You're
okay,
right,
what
you're
is
right,
the
you're
outcome?
right. No, you're
What
right.
are the recommendations? How can we sort of put this into so no, again, not that I don't want to continue the discussion. Though I'm a bit still sort of struggling with the fact that I haven't heard really sort of like a concrete proposition on how can we unlock non-grant funding towards startups that need that funding to grow and scale.
Yeah, I think
basically I've heard like, government they can step in and buy back or I heard like, yeah, maybe we can use grants sort of but I haven't heard yet.
I think if you have an LP strategy,
Yeah,
and
you
go
give
to
it a fund of
existing-
funds.
Yeah, to different players, force them to have a blue thesis, a blue investment. You go to my list, I'm a little biased here, but just since it was on stage, go to her and say, I'll give you X, but I want to deploy in blue.
Yeah,
In blue ventures. Then you pass the problem and the hot potato over to her.
Yeah.
But if you pass enough hot potatoes to enough
That's a very
people,
good idea.
then they'll go up. So you
Certainement.
mobilize particularly fintech and sorry, but fintech, because there's a lot of fintech players on the ground, right? A lot of fintech investors that have deployed fintech theses and say, well, we love fintech, but we don't want you to do fintech unless you have to really, but we want you to do all these different blue theses, and here's the money. I'm paying for it, but you need to work it. You need to work the money. And then all of a sudden you have this continuum so that these guys and these guys, everyone like...
Which level of funding does Catalyst Fund provide?
For example, per company, 200K, 100 cash, 100 venture building. That there's Catalyst Fund, there's Mercy Corps Ventures, there's Action Venture Lab. We know a lot of these investors, if that's helpful, Miley's in particular. And she could say, well, these ones would be amenable because they're raising money now, because this is not alien to them. Some will be like, I don't even know how to spell blue, so they, right?
No, just on this is, and that's something actually I've had a lot of discussions with those type of funds, and the issue is that in particular, in sectors where they're either like nascent or like not very well structured, such as not digital finance.
Yeah.
Then most of them they actually pass on because they have no clue on how they're going to exit those type of investments. Because of course, you know, if you're into the equity type of investment, you want to get out after 5, 7, 10 years. Now, go do that, you know, in an industry or a sector which is unstructured. It's going to be very, very hard to actually have any visibility whatsoever in how you're going to get out. Again, you know, in digital finance, it's different because, you know,
it's not.
Why? Then it's not. Then, yeah.
No, it's not. If you go talk to, I've heard this many times, like, we don't really exit.
Right.
And now, this is a bad moment for fundraising in general. So maybe they will be a little squeamish 2 years ago, but now it's like, I'll take your money because I don't have other money. So it's a good time to push people into different pieces now. Now, you are right. We can pass the hot potato and accelerate companies, but then comes the 10-year line, and then what? How many are going to be IPO in where? In the Kenya stock market? When was the last tech IPO? When was the last IPO of any, right? But that's when that concept you had of a private equity buyout thing at the end, which you have now 5 years to build, right? You put the whole thing in motion, like, okay, the thing is in motion, now let's work at the pool at the end to take some of these out.
So what about these big funds, the Swen funds and etc.? What is the Swen
Capital?
Swen Capital, they have a blue fund, no?
Yeah.
So what are the type of deals that they're looking for? Can't there be the exit of these
No, because
investments?
if the company isn't done growing, you don't want to put money in to take money out, because then you don't help them grow, right? And that's why later stage, like, maybe clean up the cap table a little bit, just for cosmetic reasons almost. But I don't want to take a good chunk of the money out because you're not going to grow. What would I be? If I'm the front runner in the market, I want to be the second one because I think, no, you don't, right? No one really does. It's tricky. It's tricky. But it's not impossible. I'm sure. There's not despair.
To me, sort of, there's two angles to what you were saying. On the one hand side, I think it could be a way of adjusting the mix of where the money comes from on a case-to-case basis. Strong business model, strong probability of revenue. You have, I don't know, 80% non-grant money and 20% grant money. Versus, I'm just pointing at you because I like your example so much, versus a model where it's likely to never really take off, as in commercial growth, 80% grant money, 20% non-grant money. To me, that's the one part. And the second part is maybe with sort of looking more at the impact side, it would be a possibility to create more of this, should I call it a closed system or so, that you are actually really trying to keep the money inside the system, as in it's not sort of geared at an exit, but it's geared at, I don't know, we're talking IPO, right? It's you start paying out dividends. You start repaying the grant and you start paying out dividends at a certain stage. Maybe endless growth and becoming the next Amazon is not sort of a healthy goal, but it's a healthy goal to, I don't know, be able to employ 100 people and regrow 500, name any measure, meters, square meters, whatever, of mangrove every 4 months or so. To sort of move away a little bit from the fintech model.
No, but the question is, well, would the GCF accept those terms, right?
That's the bottom line, some of the investors, they're actually private banks, they are ready to put like, $500 million. Those guys, if I go to them and say like, well,
we'll get you mangroves.
They're going to say like, okay, well, come back to us when we can actually sort of, no, but seriously, that's literally the situation we're in. They are willing to put it, and the good thing is that there is also a portion of it which is grant funding. Now, my sort of conundrum now is like, how can I make sure that we can unlock the 80% of that billion, possibly using those 20% to actually enable that to happen? Because otherwise, I can just go for the 20%. It's fine. But I can guarantee you right now that it's never going to be the Great War. It's just going to be the brick of the Great War, which is good, I guess, but it's not going to solve our issue.
But 20% is good for blended finance and catalytic finance. You can get
that's
much
right,
more
but
than
that's exactly my point, which now I'm a bit, how do you say,
frustrated, simply.
So we didn't really touch on this in that discussion. How can we use that grant funding as a catalyst, indeed, to unlock the 80 or 80%, whatever?
I mean, I know we did one here for the youth, like a Bertha Center University here, Bertha Center of Innovation. I think we use only 10% to catalyze 100%. I mean, there's a model for that, and then what we was talking about, because IUCN is not in the business of startups, etc., so rather leave it to the professionals and invest into a fund.
I'm not going to, as I say, it's not money that we will manage, but ultimately we will tell them, we need to figure out how to do it so that we can actually bring in the right partners to work with us in managing those non-grant funding in particular, because we're not going to do that. We don't know how to do that.
So FSD Africa would be someone who recipient of this type of thing?
They would probably
and then they
want
would give to you.
I'm kind of speaking.
No, I'm saying this type of organization that will take this type of money.
Yeah, these are, I mean...
they could very well be one of the partners of the project. If we feel, okay, that's what we want to do, then let's partner with FSD Africa, then they can do this, and we can do that, and everybody's happy. But as it is, I'm happy to bring in FSD Africa, as I'm happy to bring in really anyone.
Yeah.
As long as we have a clear understanding of what do we want to do, and that's why here we're going through all those consultation sort of processes to gather those ideas on. As a startup, as a local entrepreneur, what do you actually need, and how can we help make that happen? In particular, here I mean funding, which type of funding, which size of funding. But for now, I basically sort of heard many grants, which is not a good response because in a way. But I hear you. Maybe that's just it. But I don't want to believe that because otherwise we're in trouble.
In answer to your question, maybe for our case, we would be willing to take on investment if it was revenue based, as opposed to if somebody's holding a gun to our heads and pushing us to make more profit. So we know that we will generate our revenue, and we know that our revenue is going to keep growing. But if somebody was to say, I want, because the challenge we have with shareholders is that they're insatiable. So they keep asking for more and more and more, and it forces us to compromise. So if I had you say something about revenue-based financing, if somebody was to say, if you make a revenue of 100,000, then we get to keep maybe 10% of that, that we can do, But if you're telling us you must every year increase your revenue by X, then that's not possible. That would be a bit more.
No, but I think there is no question that we don't want to attract any type of investors into this type of, we don't want to attract basically sort of the sharks of this world who really will want to push you as much as just for money. That's not the point. Those guys, they keep doing what they do. And
oil and gas.
That's interesting.
So that's not the money that we want to definitely not. But there's a lot of, from just investment funds or foundations or whatever, they are actually sitting on huge shitload of money, but they don't want to give it away because they can't. Maybe because it's actually a trust fund, and instead of just putting it into like just an investment fund, which basically end up being invested into oil and gas, they'd rather actually put it into someone that is actually delivering goods, but they want to recover it at one point somehow, right? So again, they might actually, and most of them actually, they will not necessarily be looking for the unicorn or for like making like 10x or 20 or 100, but just enough, just at least to cover sort of their costs, blah 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 blah. But again, want to somehow guarantee that they will want to be guaranteed as much as possible that they won't lose the money, or at least feel comfortable that there is good prospect that they won't be losing the money, right? And that's sort of where I think we really need to focus on is what can we do to actually
There's a development bank in Germany as well.
So GIZ, it's just a development institution. When you get government money, and you have programs from government, and you give money to governments, give money to governments to develop the country. But you therefore support, more support, you want to put some programs and you developing the ecosystem. Is that what you do? You develop the ecosystem of innovation?
Yeah. For its development.
The maturity. We want to run for you, and I really like the vision. We want to nobody for them to.
So we need a running fire. I think we can buy ourselves a year.
But just because it's just that
but you got a country with
so what I'm hearing is
business development. We need to hire someone. Not even hire, we just need more resources.
and that will result in some more robust pipeline of
I would love a nap right now. I think there's an event at night. The cocktail?
No, that doesn't solve my
What is
issue
here?
of tomorrow someone's going to
It
sign
doesn't say on the program where it is.
I have sight blindness. I don't like.
We want to raise money and we want to push it to projects, impact projects.
That's the
When we got a problem, but some of the money must return back.
Have you seen what time it's
Their brain is buzzing.
They are asking for project
You're gonna be here tomorrow?
Yes.
I would love to like speak with you because it feels like over here in like a different business, you're also
also very community-centered and applying the tech and all that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so we should definitely speak.
I would love to chat to you about it.
Great.
Yeah.
I just can't absorb any more information today.
I have a list of terms to Google after this because I'm super out of my head with this conversation.
I was happy, so I came early, so I got sort of the list of abbreviations.
My kids and my son, that's what I was writing. So normally I just take this one.
Easier.
Yeah, because paper, you do not. I mean, no, you don't even read my notes. I have a visible preference with this.
And then one day you read up
I can do tech.
I think so. There's a
And all of a sudden it's not about tech at all, right?
recover, come back. See you later. My take is clear. Can I there's time, right? Time for states, not time, right?
Ping me on LinkedIn and we can connect and I can check what you sort of do.
When you get to Series B, say, and C, there's plenty. I'm sure they could just give me your name. That's not the problem.
All the VCs are here.
All the VCs are here because at this point it's so much more mature based on number of problems. There's no money here in zero, pre-C. Unfortunately.
And more particularly, we are in Africa. Family friend schools doesn't exist.
That's why they're. My sense is if we had enough startups, they will find some of them. I don't know, the lucky ones, the good ones, will find models that are profitable. But we just haven't tried enough. We haven't explored enough. And we all, once you launch in a direction, you get stuck in that trajectory.
And I think there's another problem that because we're in Africa, the seed series or the seed funding usually is even smaller. And what we've not talked about at all is transaction fees, right? Or transaction costs. And I mean, honestly, that's if you want to give out. I mean, you guys give out 50,000, right?
But we're subsidizing.
Yeah,
because my transaction cost is huge.
Exactly.
Compared to a percentage.
And now I would actually argue that for not very early stage situations, maybe 50,000 is way too much. Maybe it should rather be 5 to 10,000. But now imagine you have transaction costs which are so much higher. And this is, I think that's the huge challenge. So what I've seen in the proposal to GCF that was done for West Africa, where Make IT is involved, what they're doing is they're having basically the seed fund. They try to dash out. They basically try and forego a lot of the transaction costs, where they're just like, that's the money that we basically write off directly in order to feed the pipeline, because otherwise you cannot do it. You cannot manage 5 to 15,000 euros.
Okay, what do they have
times 100? And that's the point that you were making. That
you guys are moving towards being a fund manager, right? So that's the next thing. The person that manages a fund like that, that person doesn't work for $1,000 a month, right?
I want that. The entrepreneur does, though. But
they need to.
For now, for a little while. Yeah.
But
they're building their equity. They're getting a lot of equity. But you're right.
That is the big challenge.
Maybe a part of the solution is to match. Because I was telling you the issue is that you cannot assign the ticket size. Most of the time the entrepreneur doesn't know their need, and it's because they have the incubator accelerator that help them to have the vision in 18 months, beyond the 18 months for the 5 years, and etc. So the 15, 20, that's for how long? But the conclusion was some of them will be able to disburse 1 million over 5 years. Some of them can be able to disburse 1 million maybe over a year. So it will be hard to also find that. I think maybe you match the fund and the accelerator. For 5 years, you're going to have money for 5 years now.
Well, I wouldn't make you so confused.
You're like,
no, I mean, it's lovely, but then you do have to be hungry. You have to go hunt And so, yeah, 5 years, if every year you do X and Y, right? Like if you keep clearing milestones. If you don't, it's like, oh, great, a guaranteed job for 5 years is fun, I go on stage. Right, but yeah.
It's not from me, but you hunt unicorn, you breed zebras. You don't hunt them.
No, yeah, hunting, I'm vegetarian, so we don't hunt anything. But what I mean is, it needs to, they need to keep earning it. It cannot be a guaranteed job for 5 years. Because otherwise you're not creating a But the point I wanted to make before on your point as well is that later stage there should be
They
money.
need to earn it, the
Here,
entrepreneur.
at the beginning, here's where you can break it with, that not all 20% should go here, but there's more percent of grants at the beginning.
Yeah.
It's also cheaper. Even if
Yeah,
the
but
transaction
if you
goes
do that,
unprofitable and
if
whatever.
you do that, we simply replicate
No, but you tell them that
this is what they did, huh? Global Fund for Coral Reef. The debt fund, the grant just come at the beginning, and it's only when you are at your Series B or C that you get equity. And we don't want to replicate, we want to do something different.
And there's a challenge with it, because if you need to produce that pipeline, you need to actually hunt for everything that's out there, not only the unicorns, because you need high quality startups. And to me, that's part of sort of the next side of the coin. If you talk to a lot of investors, and yes, we are there more in the like they would like to have connects and whatever, and they're like, we have the money, we just don't have time. So and that is then if you only
Crack this one.
Exactly.
Then the thing happens. That's my point. And I agree with you, it shouldn't be just grants. We're not giving them just grants. We're putting them on an equity fundraising trajectory, but we're giving them enough grants at the beginning so they can keep going. And then you shift from more grants, a little equity, so that you're on equity to boom. And again, not all models will work, but if that's what you create at the beginning, you're
Maybe
forcing
with
that.
KPI, the model was good. She was saying that after 1 year, 6 months, you were able to generate 30% revenue.
Yeah, 35%
Maybe we
is now
put
our
them
operating capital.
KPI. If that after 1 year you're not able to generate 35% or 40%, bye bye.
So this is the VR experience.
Yeah,
so
but-
they get to travel virtually to experience
Sure.
issues.
But I wouldn't be too prescriptive.
It's like the best thing is to travel to a place, second best thing is
Make
VR.
them real entrepreneur.
Yeah.
Otherwise, there will be never the match between that equity funding and these guys. Never ever.
That's why I said the 5 years.
Life is hard.
Life is hard. This is difficult. Hey, but it's fun.
This is where I was sharing with you. I think the sort of the component that's, to my understanding, missing in the discussion right now are the innovation enablers, are the hubs, and so on. Because essentially they are the ones that need to put the startup on the track to really, really go there. They are the ones that need to tell, look, guys.
What, the incubator accelerator?
Yeah, but to me, incubation, acceleration are programs that are run by somebody, and I think it would make sense to have this discussion or include into this discussion more the somebodies that, like more people like you, that are actually sort of on the ground that talk to the.
Be alone today.
But to represent for everyone else.
No, but I think that's really, really crucial because also there, like we talk a lot with guys in Zambia, and they are
Okay, I'm really
totally onto
spitballing
the venture
here because this
building
is
topic,
not
whereas
my
others-
area of expertise. But what about
they're
like a
just
gated
really not
approach
there yet. And
with less,
especially,
with
to me personally,
more
if you
risk at the
sort of
beginning and less at the end? So I mean,
the,
so
sort of the big ones,
for example,
the Kenyas,
say
the Nigerias, the South Africas,
they
the
want to give
Egypts
away
of this
no less
continent,
than
you have a lot that are
$500,000,
just
for example.
No,
The first 50K is basically just granted, completely forgivable. Then it's outcome-based. So say, you know, we only get to the next gate once we've met the following outcomes. Then, once that is, and it's probably not profitable at the beginning, once that sort of starts leveling out, so each gate comes with slightly less risk for the investor. So as they get to each gate, they get a more higher guarantee of, they can see that the business is becoming profitable or not, and they can pull out at later stages. But at the beginning stages, it's all just forgivable, granted. That means that they're giving away small amounts of money.
TECA. So what's your accelerator?
No, that's the launcher. That gets people like this, really top talent, matches them or puts them in a room.
So as they're giving away small amounts of money,
we launch them.
They are maybe the risk of losing it is much higher. But then as they can see the progress of the startup, they are willing to take more risks.
No, that's called catalyst fund.
But perhaps then
that's the next level.
Those have to be paid back.
We have a fund manager.
And you have acceleration, plus you give them support.
Yeah. The ticket size is 100K, 100K cash, and 100K in acceleration. We've tested this model.
Extremely hard to predict and extremely hard to track as well, because it would have to be
S'il vous plaît.
individual.
Hi. Come back, or just look at us. Like, it will take just 10 minutes. So that David, you speak too much. I'm joking. No, it will be very short. It will be a short 10 minutes because I think with all the ideas that we got from all the groups, I think the facilitators, we need like to digest that a bit tomorrow and to cross-check what are the propositions that we come up with, and also to see how it can sort of fit in the GCF kind of guidelines, etc. But I would just like to say, and I will talk first for, I will talk only for the coastal community groups, which was quite big and still a bit talkative there. They're still brainstorming. And no, just to say that what they raised, we raised a lot of specific aspects of how to support coastal communities, which are mainly like the type of things that we should allocate funding on. And something that was very surprising is that most of people around the table, they say that like they are quite reluctant in giving free money to coastal communities, and that free money should be allocated only to the type of projects when you want to open the eyes of the coastal communities on new economic opportunities, economic regenerative opportunities. Otherwise, they think like to make sure that there is like an incentive for the supported coastal communities to repay what we invest in them. It's important for them to have ownership of the type of support that they have. That being said, we all raise on the table that like there is money that should be allocated into having micro localized need assessment, because a coastal community here is not the same as a coastal community 30 kilometers away from here, and that should be like the starting point of the type of support that we bring, type of support that should be bespoke, and that should be individualized as much as possible, but also enable them to be prepared in raising more, in like getting more, let's say, like conventional funding. And what else? And the support also should enable them to have access to basic type of infrastructures and access to regional and international markets when possible. basic infrastructures, we were talking a lot about, like, for instance, cold chain services that were necessary to take into consideration in this type of projects, of support projects to coastal communities. And in terms of, let's say, funding mechanism, we raised the point that there was lots of things that were done already, that there should be an analysis of what worked, what did not work, what could be adjusted. But for the ownership aspect of things, there was something that was raised. It was like sort of setting up some kind of community-led trust fund in order to improve ownership on how money is disbursed and how money is reimbursed as well. So like, this is a snippet of what we discussed. These are the main messages, but there are like lots of other suggestions that were made, and that I will be happy to discuss with my colleague tomorrow in the closed workshop. And I give over the mic to high-tech, high-growth person, Nassima.
There is nothing, there is just grant. Thank you, Erlan. So for us, it was high-tech, high-growth, but we also realized that in the impact world, we're talking about impact. And when we say high-tech, high-growth, usually in the startup world, we are talking about not zebras, but unicorn. And here we're talking about the zebras. You're hunting the unicorn, but you're breeding the zebras. And to breed the zebras is essential to have incubator and accelerators or venture studios that can really help them. And that was validated when we had discussion with all of the startups. They all went through this program. And this program really helped them to answer questions about how can they face different challenges, the type of ticket, investment ticket that they need for the growth. Because when you start as an entrepreneur, you have so many different things to handle, the HR, making your revenue, growing your business, and etc. And sometimes it's hard to also know, okay, in 18 months, how much funding do I need? In 5 years, how much funding do I need, etc. So I think that part of the money definitely will have to go through these facilitator. We have also explored maybe the idea to have a fund of fund that can also help support investing directly into what we call GPs, general partners, and try to put the pressure on them. So now that you guys have the money, go and find those startups and to help them. In terms of instrument, we did not go that far. Unfortunately, everyone wants grant, but Thomas has made it clear that there will be only probably just a third and maybe less than that. So if we want to succeed now, we also need to push people to change their mindset, and also even some entrepreneurs that are uncomfortable. And we even heard the word, we are ready to take some innovative financing called, for example, revenue-based financing, where you give me a debt and I will give you part of my revenue, 10%, but I don't want to have that feeling to have a gun in my head. And this is not the type of private investors that we will also target here, because we're talking about communities, people. But I think there's a lot of work for our group tomorrow, because we did not crack that part. Okay, if you look at a scale between the different stage, maturity and the return, I would say you have some accelerators, and I will put on the top the catapult that are able today to attract the equity directly. Then you may have the Ocean Hub Africa that is in the middle, and then I would put you here, the TECA. But we also need to go beyond the TECA, to go there and to make sure that we can get the money for those community people. And when I hear that you don't give them money like that, I think that there will be a lot of discussion to improve. Thank you.
We were talking about infra, so slightly different, but I think we set the scene pretty quickly that without the infrastructure, even looking at ports, which is sort of kind of basic, you really can't do much because it's your initial access point into the ocean, into potential conservation projects. It's where you can co-locate things like research, data. It's obviously where you've got access potentially for fishing, for shipping, and it's I think the term that was used or that we used was sort of ports being the vein to the economy. So really thinking about that kind of broader impact that you can have. And I guess the other kind of theme that came through very quickly was around, obviously there's existing infrastructure that's very much at risk in terms of, resilience to sea level rise, coastal erosion, that could have major impacts if they're not upgraded, retrofitted, which is going to have significant cost. And anything new needs to be obviously built with a kind of vision for the future. So I think what we got to in terms of infra is there's obviously probably lots of bankable projects, things that make sense, but the criteria that need to be overlaid, whether it's sort of, I think you mentioned sort of green port toolkit, which would be requirements around biodiversity, climate change, adaptation, sort of these things would need to be integrated into sort of the financing mechanisms. And the users and the access for a lot of that infrastructure needs to be obviously inclusive. So there's a lot of things that sort of naturally fit in terms of a sort of private sector investment that you will get sort of commercially. But the additional benefits that you can get, for example, thinking about, I think there was a very good example around natural reef barriers that you might have that are typically very close to ports, that might need additional investments to be reinforced or have additional sort of artificial reefs be built that could then have co-benefits around conservation and things. That might not be the priority, and that might not be integrated into the sort of initial project plan. But we need to ensure that those things come through, because without the infrastructure, you're going to struggle with all of those other aspects that we're talking about. So I guess the sort of reimagining ports as sort of clear, the role that they might have in the supporting infrastructure and the value chains. I think, the cold chains being co-located, how do we make all of that space come through was a key theme. So slightly different type of finance needed. It's like slightly different kind of expectations, but I think it was really important to sort of connect the needs. And obviously, if you try and exclude them potentially from those initiatives, you're going to really struggle to get all of the sort of follow through. We did touch on gas and the challenge around sort of these transition and the energies and how we bring some of these things through. And to be honest, I don't think we got anywhere near resolving it, but I think it's something that's going to have to be addressed, because there's also lots of developments that are going to come through, and there may be decisions that are made which will mean that if you choose to have some sort of gas development or something that's not deemed necessarily completely aligned, it might preclude the whole development from potentially, being brought in to be more sustainable, more resilient, more green, and that would be a failure in terms of what you're trying to achieve. So I think there's a sort of healthy dose of pragmatism that also needs to be brought in terms of the discussions. So it was a couple of points that will feed in. I've got some good notes. Yeah, I don't know if you've got any closing remarks, thoughts. Does anyone want to?
I think no. Well, first and foremost, thank you all for coming. I think this is it really is the start of a discussion. It's a very, very important discussion. We do need to move quite rapidly, because indeed 2030 is like tomorrow. So no pressure, but we do need to crack that nut, and very, very soon. But I do believe that in that room there is already great minds that really help us start sort of moving the needle. So I really
just want to appreciate, you guys coming here and helping us sort of figure that out. We're still not exactly where we need to be, but that's fine. It's a process, and we'll keep pushing. Yeah, no, I think now we are ready for a drink, probably. Thank you. Thank you.
My brain is buzzing. I'm going to go Google so many things right now. But Tomas, I'm forming an idea.